Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
With no further ado, please welcome Nina REVOYR.
Wow. Thank you all so much for being here. And it's so wonderful to see people from so many different walks of my life. Some I've known for a long time, some I've known for a short time. People I know in very different contexts, and some I'm just meeting tonight. So just really, really appreciate you taking the time, fighting the traffic, being here the day before the long Labor Day weekend, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about this book here, Lost Canyon. This is my fifth novel, and I think you've probably read all of them. Okay, thank you. You want another glass of wine? I mean, just want to say just a few things. This is my fifth book, and in all of my books, I try to tell stories and write about places that don't always appear in fiction. Most of my books have been set in Los Angeles. Many of them deal with communities of color and particularly kind of unexpected intersections or mixtures of people of color. My last book was set in rural Wisconsin. Still dealt with race, but also really started to talk about landscape and the land. So this book is kind of a hybrid or a combination. It's very much a book about the city in Los Angeles, but it also then takes off into the mountains. And I just want to talk a little bit about how it came to be. So I really love adventure and survival stories. When people's lives are at risk and everything's exciting, and you're about to fly over a cliff and all that kind of stuff. I love the Jack Londons, the James Dickies, people like that. But many of those stories, or most of them, arguably, are pretty kind of narrow in the demographic. And I really wanted to write an adventure or survival story that was more reflective of the diversity of the world as I know it. And so I created this story that involves these four characters. And one of them, his name is Todd, and he is a corporate lawyer, a white corporate lawyer, works in Brentwood. He's doing very well. And has a kind of fancy life, but he's feeling pretty out of touch with his very blue-collar Midwestern roots, and so he's trying to get back to a kind of authenticity. The next character is Oscar, and he is a Latino real estate agent who's both disturbed by and contributing to the gentrification of Highland Park. Lives in Glassell Park. So, and there's some of us who actually live in Glassell Park and don't claim Mount Washington. And I see some of my neighbors here. I don't know if there's a house for sale right now that's being advertised as Mount Washington. It's like, oh, really? You're right next door to us, and we live in Glassell Park. But I actually do say something about that in the book. But so there's Oscar, and he's used to a kind of fast life, fast cars, fast women, lots of money, but he's also a single dad. And so he is getting to the point of trying to make some choices that are going to have different impact on his family. Then there is Gwen, and she is an African-American social youth worker type who lives in South Los Angeles. Regina, I returned to South Los Angeles, finally. Years ago, this wonderful professor here who taught Southland said, are you going to write again about South Los Angeles? So I've written again about South LA. But works in Watts and is very committed to her work, but also feeling a level of burnout and really recovering from the death of the suicide of one of her kids. And then there is Tracy, who is the group leader, and she is, like me, half Japanese, half white. I hope I'm not quite as crazy. And she is a trainer in a local gym, and she's the link between the others. And so Tracy leads them all on this 4-day backpacking trip to the Sierra. And although these characters are very different, they're all in their late 30s, early 40s, so they're at a particular point of kind of early middle age, and where things are starting to, you're worried about family, career, choices, your body's starting to change a little bit. And so it was fun to talk about that. And then this book also was an opportunity to write about, again, part parts of LA that don't often appear in fiction. To write about places like Glassell Park, Highland Park, Watts that are not necessarily written about in a positive light. So I'm going to start by reading a little section from the very first chapter, and this involves Gwen. So I'm going to read just 2 short sections, like 4 or 5 minutes each. And the kid that she lost, his name is Robert. Gwen turned onto a street that led into the housing project where Robert and his family had lived. It was a labyrinth of 2-story bungalows that might have once been green. As always, she was struck by the desolation. On the dead grass between the units were old sinks and barbecue grills, piles of rusted bike and auto parts. Laundry waved from clotheslines, colorful items that stood out against the gray sky, like flags hung in surrender. A few proud residents struggled mightily against their surroundings. Their entryways were swept clean, with maybe a potted plant or 2, but this couldn't make up for the heavy gates over the doors, the paint flaking off the walls, the chunks of roof that collapsed with each rain. There were kids everywhere, youths circling on bikes, toddlers sitting on stoops with their mothers or grandmothers, a group of middle school kids throwing around a football. A dozen little ones waited for the single swing on an otherwise broken playset. Gwen wove her way through the development, looking but not stopping when she passed the row where Robert had lived. Once he had been one of those kids, sitting on his stoop. Now he was gone, and she couldn't bear to look for very long at the place where he should have been, but wasn't. Just as Gwen turned into her parking lot, her cell phone rang. She picked it up and saw the caller ID, Aileen Richardson, and let it ring one more time before she answered. "Hi, Mom." "Oh, hello, Gwen," her mother said, sounding distracted, as if Gwen had been the one to call her. "Are you at work?" "Yes," Gwen said. "Where else would she be?" Good. I was just calling to remind you that Dana's birthday is on Friday." "Yes, Mom, I know. I sent a card today." "Oh, wonderful. Thank you. You know how lonely your sister gets up there at school. It's good for her to hear from her family." Gwen tried to quell her irritation. Her sister, she knew, was just fine. 12 years younger than Gwen, she was now a first-year student at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Dana had been raised in a totally different era of their mother's life. She'd grown up in the house in Ladera Heights that had just been a stopping point for Gwen, had been lavished with clothes and trips and extracurricular activities, had been part of Jack and Jill, a young women's leadership group at church, the AKAs at Berkeley. Now, at 24, Dana's birthday was still celebrated with as much fanfare as if she were a child. Yet there had been years in Gwen's own childhood, when she lived with her great aunt, that Aileen had forgotten Gwen's birthday altogether. "I'm not going to be able to call her on Friday, though, Mom," Gwen said, "but I mentioned that in the card." "Why not?" "I'm going on my backpacking trip this weekend, remember?" A tense silence, then a sigh. "Yes, now I recall. You're really going to do that, Gwendolyn?" "Yes, Mother, I'm really going to do that." "It just sounds so uncivilized. I mean, how will you bathe? How will you use the restroom? Where will you sleep? On the ground?" Gwen didn't answer, partly because she wondered these things herself. If you really want to know, I'll tell you later. She stared out past the fence that enclosed the property and over toward the railroad tracks, where a mangy brown dog picked hungrily through a mountain of trash. "I just don't know how you got this idea in the first place," Aileen continued. "It's not the kind of thing we've ever done." Gwen thought wryly that her mother had little idea of what she'd done, but she kept this observation to herself. "Chris and Terry Nelson went on backpacking trips every summer," she said, remembering her mother's neighbors. "Yes, but they're boys," Aileen replied. She didn't add, although Gwen knew she thought, "and white." "And speaking of boys, are there any men going with you?" "Yes, 3 men." "Couldn't one of them carry your things?" "No, Mom. They'll have their own backpacks." "Well, I don't know what kind of man would let a woman carry so much weight." She stayed silent, waiting for her mother to launch into her lecture about Gwen's non-existent love life, but she didn't. "And is a hotel too expensive?" Aileen asked. "Is that why you're sleeping outside?" "It's not that. We want to be outdoors." I really wish you'd do something that would pay you a decent salary. And here we go, Gwen thought, out of nowhere. I like my job, Mom. You've done your part giving back, don't you think? I just worry about you in that dangerous area with all those desperate people. You could always go to business school at night, or even law school. Stuart and I could help you. Thanks, listen, I have to go. I'll give you a call before I leave. Gwen hung up, took a deep breath, and got out of the car. She never failed to rile her, Gwen's mother. In the space of 5 minutes, Aileen had managed to denigrate both the white people whose unclean habits Gwen appeared to be emulating and the black and Latino kids with whom she worked. So that's Gwen. So you get to know all of the characters, at least 3 of the main characters in the beginning of the book, and they each have their kind of backstory and their reason for going. And then the 4 of them all leave Los Angeles and go on this trip, and they have planned this 4-day backpacking trip. But once they get to the ranger station to pick up their permit, it turns out there is a forest fire, and they can't go on their originally planned trip. And there's actually, as you may know, a big forest fire happening right now in Kings Canyon. So they're trying to figure out what to do, and the ranger, gives them a couple suggestions. None of them sound great. And then he says, there's this one trail you might want to check out, the trail that no one has been on for many years. And he even has a hand-drawn map of it, which is this map here, to a mysterious and beautiful place called Lost Canyon. And so they decide this is a good idea, and they start to go on this alternative trip. And at first, everything looks, seems fine. It's beautiful, it's exhilarating, it's gorgeous, all the things that they went for. And then they stumble onto someone who does not really want to be found, as sometimes can happen. And so they kind of get into 2 different kinds of trouble. One around some illegal growing of some drugs in the mountains, and the second around a group of white supremacists. And you may or may not know, I always think this is interesting in this incredibly diverse state that we have, that California actually has more hate groups than any other state in America. So as you can imagine, when this very diverse group of hikers from Los Angeles stumbles upon these folks, they're not received with welcome arms. And so bad things happen. And ultimately our characters have to make some interesting choices, difficult choices, unthinkable choices, and run for their lives and try to get out of the mountains. So that's what sets off kind of the adventure survival aspect. What else did I want to say? Oh, yes. Like every adventure survival story, which is part of why I love them, when everything's on the line, when your life's at stake, you really kind of get to see who people are, under pressure. And so it was kind of fun to have the characters face that pressure, and each of them faces a certain kind of reckoning. And this book, although it's an adventure novel, and although all these people have their individual stories, is also about more. It's about drugs and drug policy. It's about race and racial identity, as well as class and gender. Because for all these characters, who they are and where they come from and the assumptions that they carry influences both how people respond to them, obviously, but also how they read particular situations. What one person thinks might be a perfectly okay situation, the other thinks is maybe not so okay. And so you see the differences in perception. It's also about, kind of, again, early middle age, and about the city, about poverty, about gentrification, about youth. One good piece of luck for these characters is that they happen upon a dog, and who belongs to one of the bad guys, and the dog kind of switches sides. And she's a border collie, so she's very smart. So she ends up with the good guys, and plays a pretty significant role in the book. And then of course ultimately the book is also about both the power and the restorative ability of nature. So the last thing I'm going to read, just another short section, is later on in the book. This is after they've already encountered some bad people, some bad things have happened, and they are running for their lives. But you also get a sense of what the mountains look like and feel like. And this is a Todd chapter. They marched on without talking. The ground was nearly level. They were moving through the bottom of the valley. A bright blue Steller's jay shot through a cluster of trees, turning sideways and touching each trunk lightly with its feet, like a skier running a slalom course. They passed a tree with a giant mushroom growing out of its side, like a white fleshy ear turned downward to hear messages from the ground. Then Todd stopped to point out a clump of coarse black hair stuck on the side of a tree. "Look," he said. "A bear used this tree to scratch his back." Oscar squinted at the hair and shivered. "Wow, he must have been a big one." "Is there any other kind?" Gwen said. "Let's keep going." They kept walking a bit faster, and then suddenly they were out of the woods. It was lighter now, almost 7 a.m. The peaks on either side of them were lit orange and gold in the early morning sun. They were flanked by huge boulder fields, amazingly white, like giant snowballs that had rolled downhill. Beyond them, at the end of the valley, massive spires and sharp pinnacles with sheets of snow draped between them extended thousands of feet into the sky. Todd's heart lifted, despite everything. He'd never seen such grandeur. He looked again at the corridor between the turrets and pinnacles, which framed the valley all the way to its end. It was like strolling down an avenue lined with cathedrals. It was like walking into the arms of God. Directly in front of them was a basin they had seen from the top, but what had looked like a small break in the trees now revealed itself to be a bigger open space. It was probably a mile across, maybe more. The land was uneven, patches of green and brown interspersed with slabs of granite. In the middle of it all was a lake. A small stream fed into it and then flowed out the other side. This, in turn, Todd knew, would eventually lead to other water, one of the countless rivers that rose up in California and flowed all the way to the sea. "Well, there's our water," he said. "Yeah, good," Gwen said. "But look at those mountains." Now Todd looked up ahead of them and saw why Gwen was worried. He'd been so focused on the beauty around him that he hadn't thought about what awaited when they got to the valley's end. From the ridge, the peaks to the east had looked formidable but distant. From here, he could see the full scope of them. The range they had to cross was massive, a jagged spine of sharp barren peaks, easily over 13,000 feet. But he was still overcome by a sense of awe and a sudden understanding of the land. The western Sierra built gradually, with gentle foothills and lush valleys and hospitable forests. Now they were approaching the starker eastern Sierra, where one plate of the earth had pushed under another and thrust the mountains into the sky. "How are we supposed to get over those?" Oscar asked, sounding disheartened. "We can totally do it," Tracy insisted. Oscar looked uncertain, even angry. "I don't know, Tracy. I think we're in deep shit." "We can do it," Todd agreed. He was examining the peaks closely. "There's that shoulder I saw before between the two peaks. It looks lower than the rest of the range." He paused. "There's a pass way to the right, too. That's probably our best bet." But from the valley floor, this seemed very high and terribly far away. Todd's confidence snagged, began to falter. But he fought this and looked squarely at the others. "Let's go," he said. "We need to keep moving." They stepped away from the cover of trees and out into the open, and Todd flinched involuntarily, expecting a shot. Nothing came. They picked their way over the soft, springy earth, passing boulders as big as trucks. With each step, they could see more of the slope they'd descended that morning, and it was bathed in brilliant light. There was no movement, and Todd was relieved. "It doesn't look like anyone's up there," Gwen said, as if reading his mind. They all paused and looked back. "You're right," Tracy said. "Well, let's keep moving before someone is." Okay, thank you. Did you all notice the kind of beer? I'm not subtle. It really is one of my favorite beers, though. Okay, so I would love to hear any questions. Does anyone have anything they want to ask or complain about or comment on? Yes.
So did you hike when you were young, or was it research for this book that was first sleep on the ground trip?
No, I'm a relatively. I hiked for a long time. Probably, I really started. Where's Naomi? She's still here? She was here. Yeah, okay. So you read this thing. I actually started hiking in Japan in my early 20s. I lived in a mountainous area, and I just had never really noticed mountains before. And started hiking there, and then I lived in the Ithaca area, which is beautiful in New York. And then I came back here, and I thought, whoa, there's mountains. I hadn't noticed them, and just came to them. I mean, you grow up in LA, and you think about the beach, but I started hiking fairly late as an adult, and then just fell in love with it, and then kept getting frustrated that I had to come back. I'd go out further and further and have to come back. And so, but the backpacking only started a few years ago, and I just fell in love with it really hard. And think about it, as Felicia can attest, just about all the. I'm just thinking of the story. She came out of the bedroom one day, and I was holding a magazine like this, kind of looking at a centerfold. She's like, "What are you looking at?" I'm like, "It's a mountain." It was a mountain. So. Yeah. So all of these, that even that little bit that I read to you, I can literally tell you which, like the scene, the thing of the avalanches, the snowballs like rolling downhill. That was from a trip that we were on. And then the thing about the mushroom, with the ear of the ground, that's up to where we go. And then the bear, I was just about to imitate a bear scratching his, but I've seen that several times. Or the thing with the blue jays happened just last year on the trip that we were on. So it's, and I mean, this book cover is, there's a story in the book about just a little throwaway anecdote about a bear. Well, actually, it's a deer that fell over a waterfall, 200-foot waterfall, in a storm. And then a bear came and took the carcass away and dragged it up a mountain. And I saw that happen, and so so I had to put that in there. So, there's just like little bits of things, anecdotes from different things that I've worked into the story. So.
I think I want to chime in there, just to answer Jeff's question. Nina lives in our neighborhood. I knew her for just a little bit. I remember, like, Trish and I were sitting on it, and we were sitting there, and there was this woman, apparently, when she's walking around our neighborhood with a backpack. Wow, she's really serious about rushing around, loading backpack around. I was really impressed.
Well, you never know when you might have to set up camp, so it's always good to go prepared. So I don't do that regularly, but I do sometimes use my headlamp in the neighborhood. Was that training for Whitney? Maybe? Okay, yeah, that's possible.
So most of your research was sort of, empirical. You were out there doing it. Can you talk about other kinds of research you had to do? Was there any other kind of research?
Yes, the only other, and I mean, it's funny because we talk, the only, and many of many of my books are historical, set and have a lot of detail and do involve a lot of research and actual looking in books, looking at stuff, This just involved opening my eyes and being present and open to the world around me. And so one of the things that is so important to me is that the kind of beauty that I connect to, and I think that people can connect to, is not just out in the wilderness. It's right here in the city, and there are descriptions of what a cactus flower looks like in Los Angeles when it, or what the clouds look like against the mountains, or, a humming. There's so much to notice that's right here if you are open to paying attention to it. So I didn't go on any of these trips. The one thing that was useful actually is that when I had written the book, I was done with the book, but I had never gone on a trip in late June, which is when these characters go. And so a couple of us went on just a weekend trip last summer in late June, and I learned some very important things, like it's freezing as hell in late June, that things freeze overnight, which I hadn't, so I had to change some things. Wildflowers are indifferent, but it's not like I went out there purposely to do research. I went out there because I wanted to be out there, and then was struck by a lot of stuff. So the things I really had to do research on were specific to related to the weed production, and kind of the levels of elevation at which we have since learned also unintentionally by seeing some, and people do grow some stuff, and they don't really want you to find it, and then also to white supremacy, because when you spend time on either side of the mountains, and someone mentioned Whitney, folks have been to Lone Pine and 395 and Manzanar, and there are some scary people out there. And if you walk through, someone wrote me recently, just in the last couple of weeks, saying that they had not realized they were in Lone Pine and they were walking around and they were seeing Confederate flags. I said, yes, Alabama Hills, those wonderful, beautiful rocks right in front of Mount Whitney, was named after Confederate worship. So, there is a history of hatred. And on the other side of the mountains, there's also a lot of white supremacist activity. We've run into some pretty scary people. We ran into some scary people just a couple weeks ago, and so I had to do some research on that. What groups are active? What groups are active in what parts of California? What kind of tattoos are they going to have? Because there are variations amongst the different groups. So that kind of stuff. But the bulk of it was just lived experience, and then trying to collect either every misadventure I've ever had, and combine it with every misadventure I worry about having. So, yes.
The most danger you felt that you've been in on your backpacking, either from nature or from people?
I actually haven't. When I've run into scary people, it's not been in the backcountry. It's been like in the foothills or in the stores, or in the gas station and the meth labs, and there's a lot of scary activity in some rural areas. But I've never really felt threatened in the backcountry by a person. I've been scared shitless of bears. But now that I have encountered them enough times, you get over it, right? It's kind of exciting, but they run away from you, and but the thing that really scares me the most is lightning. And just because you are so, I remember being in my first lightning storm at elevation, at 7,000 or 8,000 feet. And this was just on a day hike. It was so powerful. I remember thinking, it feels right now that I'm in the place where storms are made. It is, it was just incredible. And then we were out on a trip. Remember, we came back from that trip, and it turned out that there had been lightning strikes and trees that fell down. And, so that's the stuff that really scares me. And it still scares me. So. Anybody else? Yes, Lee.
Do you think this book, just because of its subject matter, opens up kind of a new audience for you all? In terms of adventure and all that? I don't know if it was your intent, but I can see other people discovering you through it.
I hope so, but my books are kind of weird, and in that they're not in a good way. Thank you. Yes. It may, but because it's so heavy, it is an adventure survival book, but it's also so much about the city. It's about race. It's about other things that, I can just imagine, the bros who go backpack, on the PCT, I can't, who knows? We'll see. You can never predict what people are going to connect to or not. And just the same way, folks who are really interested in reading about the city are not necessarily, I can't tell you how many people have already said to me, I'm never going to go on a hike after I read this, so I don't know. Anybody else? All the questions have been this side of the room. Yes. And then, thank you.
And I love reading about places in LA that at that time I hadn't really read about in books, but knew, living here. Because I feel like when you're talking about outside of LA, there's all the things that scare me. Try to explain to me. No, I don't see those and I was wondering about if you can talk a little more about the work you do.
Mm-hmm. What do I do, guys? Everything. Yeah, I don't want to talk about work. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if people heard the question. She was talking about Southland and different communities, and she asked about the work. I work for a wonderful nonprofit that works with kids in poverty, but particularly those who've been affected by family and community violence. And we work mostly in Central Los Angeles and in South Los Angeles. So, and a lot of my life right now is wrapped up in work that we're doing in Watts, and we're there's a weird convergence of my real life and writing life with this book that has never really occurred before, including the timing. But it's also really wonderful because I got to write about a place that is very dear to me, and that I'm giving both my creative work, energy to, but also my work energy. And even though the part that I read is kind of a dire description, when it circles back to Watts, the book ends in Watts, and it ends. It's a very loving and hopeful description, which I think is reflective. Those two sides are reflective, I think, of my reality. So a lot of my colleagues are here, and they just, I'm a suit. I don't do the real work. Many of the people who are here, well. You don't have to say that. but the folks who really work with the kids and families are my heroes. So, okay, you had your hand up.
I read about you in the Times, and I heard you on the radio. And I'm so excited to discover you and to read your book.
Thank you.
But I went hiking as a teenager and ran into some very scary white people,
Mm-hmm.
and to be more afraid of white folks than
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they were really. Ever since then, I can't really go hiking
Mm-hmm.
in the park or to
Mm-hmm.
hikes.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Joshua Tree and I got really afraid of white supremacists.
Mm-hmm.
I always think I'm going to run into them. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing. I can't wait to read your book. But,
Well, and you go with friends, and you're going to be okay.
yeah. But also you were born in Japan.
I was born in Japan. Yeah.
When you went, did you go back again?
Yeah, I lived there. I lived in Japan until I was 5. Came to the U.S. My mom's Japanese. My whole family's still there, except for her. Everyone else on her side is still in Japan. And then I went back after college for a couple years and started to hike, as I said. And I just remember hiking in this little, several thousand foot, but now it seems, mountain in town. And it kicked my butt. I was like 22, 23, 24. And I remember trying to go up the hill, and this gentleman who was like in his 70s, did I tell you this story? Zoomed up the hill, and I'm like, oh God. And I can speak Japanese well enough to say, wow, this is really difficult. And he said, oh, no, it's not. I do this every day, and then I got up to the little shrine at the top with a little sign in, a book. And in fact, he had signed it every single day. And talk about feeling lame, but it motivated me. Yes, sure.
Did you experience the race? I lived in Japan a long time myself.
Mm-hmm.
Experience the racism of being out?
Oh, sure. Yeah. But it was not as intense in Japan as it was moving to rural Wisconsin and being the only kid of color in a very homogeneous environment. That was very, very difficult, and it really at a young age shaped my understanding of race in this country. And it's still influenced, that's what my last book was about. But that also, there's hope in that too. All of my books have, as you know, they have some tough stuff, but they're also, ultimately pretty hopeful. I'm a pretty optimistic person. So I take joy in many things. Yes. Hi.
These characters are afraid for their lives, right?
If they know what's good for them, yeah.
It's not like they're very different. Do they ever say, God, please get me out of it?
Of course.
Do they have different, varying ideas of what a God or a higher power?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, that was something I thought about carefully. They have different kind of experiences of faith, and I do know, although I've never been in danger from people, I have been in a couple of bad enough situations. Didn't someone ask me what the scariest thing was? The scariest thing was being on Mount Rainier, and at high camp when this huge noise happened. We were all in our tents, and everyone jumped up because it was either a rock fall or ice fall, and we were supposed to be asleep. We all jumped up, and I was scared for my life. And what made me even more scared for my life was knowing that the very worst accident in the history of Mount Rainier, which was an ice fall that swept 18 climbers into a crevasse and killed them, had happened right where we were sleeping. And so we made it. Obviously, I survived. We made it to... you should see the looks I'm getting right now. We made it. So I asked the guy, because that's a very dangerous, you got to go roped up with that, and so I asked the guide, well, where are the bodies? Where are they? And he said, we're basically sleeping right on top of them. So that was and there was a lightning storm. So we ended up not being able to summit because there was this huge storm. So that was probably that was pretty scary. But yes, they have different experiences of faith, and I know what it's like to be out there. The thing about when you are in trouble, and I wasn't in serious trouble, is that you just realize no one can help you. There is no communication. You don't have, and that is a very, but there's something also kind of amazing about what are you going to do when everything's on the line and you only have yourself to depend on. So that was kind of fun to imagine. Anybody else? Yes?
I'm wondering, in Southland, characters come together in sort of an organic way. They happen to live in places and layering. In this one, it seems as though you had to figure out a way to bring them together.
Yes.
Well, can you talk a little bit about that process, figuring out how to bring them together?
Sure.
And then what that is?
Sure. I was telling you about Tracy, the trainer. So there's a place. So I'm in my 40s, and right about when I hit 41, everything started to fall apart. I had a knee problem. I had an Achilles problem. I had some other just thing after thing after thing after thing. And so I went. Actually, Bernadette suggested a place called Cats in Pasadena. Everybody should go there. It's a physical therapy. Teresa, you've been there. I took you there. The spreading the gospel. But it's an incredible physical therapy place. But it's very athletic. It makes you. I lifted weights like I hadn't in college, but it literally changed how I felt about my body and how strong the body was. And it just that you realize if something hurts here, it's not just because of the knee. It's because of this and that and everything else. And so what was interesting is that you sit on these tables because as you warm up, you ice, you heat, and you meet all the people around you. And so now you're going. See, I've converted someone else. And the amazing range of the people who go was very striking to me. It's a physical therapy site, so people from all walks of life. So you could have a lawyer and a tech guy and a high school athlete, and a writer. I met, it's funny, Alan Zarembo. That's where I ran into him there because we were both, doing physical therapy. And so I thought, first of all, I just so fell in love with the place. How am I going to bring these characters together from different parts of the city? And that became the vehicle, is that they all were the clients, essentially, of this one trainer or this one place. So, and yeah, it was hard because how do you put together Brentwood, Watts, and Highland Park? And that's how I tried to do it. Good question.
There aren't a lot of stories out there about people of color in nature.
Right.
Or in space.
Right.
People survive better. Immigrant and we have gone through some shit and we survived. I will survive space. But so is it intentional, putting kind of people of color in our bodies in nature? Because it's something that you see when you read an adventure book or even a science.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that was one of the things in not being able to fully read my notes that I forgot to mention is that this is also a book about diversity or the lack thereof in the environment and the ways that oh my God, I could talk about this for half an hour. But when you will hear, I'll try to limit myself to 4 or 5 things. 10 things. You hear all this stuff, which I think is true about the lack of diversity in, for example, national parks. And on the one hand, that is true. And I think the parks have not done a good enough job of reaching out, making the experience accessible to people. So there's that. But the other part of it is that's also simplistic because if you go to Chantry Flats here, if you go to places in the Sierra that are not the national parks that charge you $25, or $20 to get in, there are folks of color like you would not believe. And sledding, camping, enjoying, but not necessarily in a formalized way. And the experience is different. It's not necessarily about going off into the wilderness. It's about family. It's about what you can do. You go to Elysian Park, you go to Kenneth Hahn Park, and it's a very different experience. And so there's a kind of disconnect in how people talk about nature. But it is, so I think that it's so complicated. I think that people of color do enjoy nature, but there also has to be a way to communicate, and part of that has to be having staff in parks and places that reflect kids, that reflect the race and class backgrounds of everybody, and not just who they think is the outdoors. I read something very interesting by a African American academic out of Berkeley who actually went through Outside Magazine and Backpacker Magazine. I subscribe to both of these things, But she talked about the number of images of people of color in pictures over like 10 or 15 years. It was so abysmal. And so how if, there are all kinds of disconnects, but at the same time, I can tell you, we take kids to camp, and how our kids respond amazingly when they have a chance to interact. The boys, I don't want to just say boys, but especially love bugs, and they love trees, and they love to pick up leaves, and they feel, so it's about having kind of the guides or the ability to introduce and the connections. All that being said, there's also much more complicated history, so because for a lot of communities of color, nature is scary. Nature has not good connotations. It has connotations of being chased, or it has connotations of working in the fields. And why the hell would you want to be outside if you're working in the fields all day? And that's so there's so many levels to this. But yes, one of the things I was really trying to do was talk about people of color in nature, whether it's city or the wilderness, and kind of push that a little bit and to depict it, because people are out there. So thank you for that question. Sorry if I went on too long about that, but it's a passion. Anybody else? You guys have been so patient. One last anything.
What's your next big adventure? I had to cancel 2 different backpacking trips this summer because of family stuff, and so that has been heartbreaking. The only thing about the forest fires is that it might have impacted our trip, so at least there's that. But so next summer, it's going to have to be next summer. Yeah, so probably a week-long trip next summer, and a couple shorter ones. So thank you. Again, thank you so much for being here. Just really appreciate it. Thank you for the questions.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.